Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is an update from Washington, D.C. on public policy and on COVID. I'm Caitlin Sickles with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. On today's webinar, we have Paul Nathanson, also from PRG at Bracewell, and Omar Nashashibi and John Guzik from the Franklin Partnership. If you've been joining these webinars in the past, you know that these are a production of the National Tooling and Machining Association and the Precision Metal Forming Association, and that the four of us on the call represent both groups, doing both government relations and strategic communications. So Omar and John are doing the on-the-ground lobbying, working with members of Congress and regulators and folks in the administration, to advocate on behalf of small and medium-sized manufacturers across the country. Paul and I are amplifying that work in traditional and social media, helping to reach those policymakers and other people who have the ability to impact your businesses around the country. We have been bringing these webinars to you since 2020. Updates on COVID and then on other issues that are pertinent to business as things have developed. Here's today's agenda for the webinar. We'll be talking about what's going on with federal agencies. There's an update from the CDC there and others, a lot on supply chain and of course on tariffs and trade. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Guzik at the Franklin Partnership. Wait, fake out. No, I'm not. I'm going to do a quick media update first. So this is a really something to draw attention to because I think it's a cool story. The Pittsburgh chapter of the NTMA has an annual apprenticeship competition. We've got some media hits related to that apprenticeship competition. It won't be a surprise to anybody on the webinar to know that manufacturers continue to struggle to find skilled workers. One of the ways, of course, that people recruit and retain and train workers is through apprenticeship programs. This is a great program that gives young people the opportunity to compete, show off their skills, both in written and hands-on format. These are some great articles. Our team helped put together some press material and do some press outreach, and the combined effort with the local chapter, their own PR efforts, resulted in some great stories. There's also a Wall Street Journal article here on this slide that has to do with supply chain. We had members mentioned in this article talking about the impact of supply chain issues on manufacturers. So that's obviously a huge part of the work that we do, and it impacts the way that policymakers see manufacturers and include them when they're making important decisions that impact your business. Now with that, I will turn it over to John to talk about an update from federal agencies.
Well, thanks, Caitlin. And we'll start off with CDC, the recent CDC guidance. We are seeing states and localities and communities lifting their vaccine mandates, their mask mandates at the individual level. But at the CDC, they came out with a guidance that if you receive the J&J vaccine, if you're 18 years or older, they're recommending that you receive the booster shot 2 months after your initial shot with a J&J vaccine. But unfortunately, CDC is going to come out with a huge information dump later this afternoon. Omar, what are you hearing about what the CDC is going to announce today?
That's right. Thanks, John. Today at 3:45 Eastern, CDC is going to have a telecall, press call on media and go through what they're going to do on their new metric systems for what they're going to have out there. As you all recall, the CDC has a couple of tiers and levels of stress points, and they have a map that's put out there where they've got significant decrease and high levels of transmission. What they're going to do right now is, instead of looking at the number of cases reported, they're going to change the way CDC categorizes whether there's significant areas of concern to measuring it by hospitalizations. And what they believe that will do is, when now the CDC issues guidance for the local jurisdictions and states to follow, what they're typically have been doing is they've been looking at overall infections, and that's when the CDC determines whether or not you should wear a mask in indoor public settings. That's the phrase, public indoor settings. And now they're going to do, if they change the characteristics and they believe they're at a space where they can do so, the map will then officially start to look at hospitalizations as the more significant measurement of illness. And therefore, if you reach that certain level of hospitalizations, then the CDC will again recommend indoor masking. They believe that the shift will mean roughly 20% of the country will be able to pull back on mask mandates and social distancing limits, is what some of them are saying in a few of their items that have been leaked out there. But John, to your point, yes, we're already starting to see a number of the states, blue states especially, start to pull back on mask mandates. And the CDC this afternoon, John, we think is going to give us a little bit more clarity on what they think moving forward for the spring months.
And we'll send an update shortly after the announcement, and we'll obviously bring it up next month at our webinar as well. Other federal news, here's a press release from the Department of Labor where they announced that they're going to hire 100 more inspectors in the wage and hour division to enforce the rules. In 2021, the wage and hour division collected $230 million in wages owed to roughly 190,000 workers. And so we can manufacturers could potentially expect to see more visits from the Department of Labor. We're also expecting the Department of Labor to review the overtime rule. The rule is expected to be released sometime in April. This is, from the Obama administration, had a proposal, went to the Trump administration, and now this is the Biden administration putting their fingerprint on it. They want to raise the overtime threshold from $33,568 to close to $50,000. Some wanted the administration to go even higher, as high as $80,000. But this rule is expected in April. Watch out for it. We also expect there will also adjust the level for the highly compensated. So. And then finally, the 300A electronic filing reports are due on Tuesday, March 2nd. Just a reminder that OSHA does not send reminders that these the 300A reports are due. So remember, they are due on Tuesday. But Omar, there's a lot of talk in Washington about decarbonization. So why don't you explain a part of this?
There is, and this will tie into some of our trade discussions on steel and supply chains that we've mentioned. I think the folks over at Bracewell back in October mentioned that part of the deal with the European Union included a plan towards decarbonization of steel and trying to reduce the import-export of heavy carbon-intensive goods, such as steel, that aren't manufactured with a quote cleaner approach. And starting in October of 2023, those EU and the United States are supposed to have a plan on how to address the carbonization there. But the Department of Energy is moving forward and taking comments through Monday on the decarbonization of industry. And what they have done is they've gone through and they've identified, saying that industry, meaning manufacturing and others, as you can imagine, and that includes oil and gas and chemicals and others. Those folks emit 30% of the overall greenhouse gases, just around a little bit under that overall. And that's separate from what autos, passenger vehicles generate. And that industry uses a third of the nation's energy. So what they've done is they've got a request for information out, and they've identified a number of areas that they want to look at. There's 9 titles. 5 of them are focused on specific industries, such as steel and iron is one, chemicals, food and beverage is another one, as you can see. Then there's also other areas of process heating, and then they also include some of our folks that manufacture products out of that steel and iron. And what they're trying to do is identify if there are technologies that are feasible that could reduce the carbon footprint during the production process of those goods that are out there. And here you can see where the breakdown is, which is basically a target list of traditionally we've seen the Biden and Obama administrations look at the oil and gas industry. Now they're increasingly looking at general industry. And the reason that we put this out for our members and manufacturers is understand if they're looking at this with the European Union from a decarbonization on steel, and now they're looking at it internally for different sectors and industries that affect you all, it's important to take a look at what that is. And I think John's going to jump in here on the social cost of carbon a little bit, but we wanted to let you all know a recent court case of a decision that makes, because as the administration is putting together new rules and regulations, they use a certain calculation to justify taking actions in the EPA environment and social welfare and healthcare spaces called the social cost of carbon. It's an actual dollar amount that they add up, and they come up with ways to be able to apply a dollar amount to each ton of carbon dioxide that's emitted. So of all the CO2, you put 1 ton equals currently $51. That's what the Obama era was at. And there's folks that want to increase that to over $100. And what that means is you can say that because you emit X amount from your manufacturing plant, what it does is that could also further impact the health of an individual, could lead to asthma, it could deal with agricultural challenges. I know the folks over at Bracewell are very, very active on this. And so I'd invite Paul to jump in, since I know their energy department is pretty active on it.
Yeah, I just want to relate it to the environmental justice initiatives that, for example, that EPA is and other agencies and DOE are implementing. We have several clients who are very involved in it, meaning some of them are targets of EJ initiatives down in Louisiana. And I just wanted to remind manufacturers too that no matter who win, we're gonna start talking about the midterms, in the next coming up in the next few webinars. But the administration through executive action still has environmental justice issues as a priority, and that could affect, as you were saying, Omar, it's affecting folks down the chain, and it's going to get to the manufacturing base too. It's environmental justice is a wide-ranging term, but it's focused on disadvantaged communities who have suffered from the impacts of pollution and related issues, and it's a big issue for the progressive side of the Democratic Party and a big priority for the White House. So just to keep that in mind as well. Thanks, Omar.
Thanks. And we did get a question here quickly before we start. I turn it back over to John. Question is, are China and India part of the social cost of carbon discussion? Let's parse the question. They are in the discussion. They aren't necessarily a part of the discussion. And what I mean by that is, yes, we do have a way to gauge it. Just a quick look on the other computer. $86 per ton is what India rather, is credited. So their social cost of carbon is affixed at $86 per ton, whereas we are at $51. The cost of their economy is scheduled at $210 billion a year. But no, they are not part of an initiative to move forward, and neither is China. And of note, as we get into supply chains and trade in a little bit, Japan did not agree to join the United States and European Union as part of decarbonization of steel. So as of now, it's the EU and the US that are moving forward into that measure. Some might call it handcuffing themselves. Others might say they're trying to lead the rest of the way there. But John, I do think that this administration is really focused not just on roadblocks for manufacturers, but they really are trying to push things out and try to solve the supply chain issue as best as they can.
Yeah, and here's a link. You can look through many of the various departments of what their supply chain plans are. Here are their links to the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, Agriculture, DOT, HHS. So if you are interested in the supply chain plans for any one of those industries, feel free to click on that link. But one of the major focuses within the administration on the supply chain is they want to create domestic initiatives at the Import-Export Bank to promote exporting, particularly for manufacturing and small businesses. They want to provide money for small businesses, ports for the development of domestic critical minerals that need to be developed in this country, because as we know, China has has a lot of the critical minerals that we need for further enhancement of our supply chain, and so there's a tremendous effort to enhance that at the administration level.
I think that it's important to note that on the Export-Import Bank, it's been traditionally known for supporting risky projects overseas, whereas a U.S. company might want to do a partnership or sell into somewhere else, and what they do is they help provide financing and loans. What EXIM is trying to do now is provide actual injection of cash, not just to secure and help with accounts receivable, but actually help you borrow towards the manufacturing process and towards capital. And that would be a change. And that charter is going to be voted on in the spring, we're hearing, after Biden executive order on that front. And so they really are trying to move in a number of areas. Y'all are very well aware we helped create, they used to be called the NUMIs, the 16 Manufacturing USA Institutes, and that we're seeing a big emphasis from this administration on trying to work on that regionalization of manufacturing approach and push these out there. Much of this does not need legislation. This is all things that they are already doing or have done. The reports that John outlined on the previous page is a culmination of an executive order a year ago. What President Biden did is he asked for a report within 100 days that was delivered in June of last year, and then a more comprehensive report that was due 12 months, which is now what we're getting right now with the data dump when they look in here for the additional funding for Buy American, if you're in those categories, and commercial ready technologies. As you can see, where they flushed this out over internally, and now they've started to release their manufacturing plan. But John, you also mentioned the critical minerals. Here's a quick fact sheet, and then we'll tie it in and maybe even ask Paul to jump back in a second on the next slide on Ukraine-Russia impact on supply chains. But the Department of Defense has already sent out $35 million to work out in California a way to bring in some heavy rare earth elements. And same thing, demonstration projects are looking at in Arizona and Nevada. So just know that these are some of the areas where we're trying to be more self-reliant. This is a proposal that really was pushed in the very late days of Obama, but picked up very well by the Trump administration and focused quite a bit on critical minerals. And you'll see why they're so essential. If you go in here and you talk to the metallurgists out there and what does it take to make steel, for example, you're using either iron ore or pig iron. And you can tell right here from this slide that Ukraine, of the world's exports, accounts for 16.3% of the world's pig iron exports. And so in many ways, there are some concerns that are from that standpoint. I don't know, Paul, if you've got any other thoughts that you've got from your experience working in those areas, but there are some concerns when it comes to the metals, minerals, and some of the other steel areas, not to mention aluminum from Russia as well.
Yeah, I did that on our lobby shop podcast that I do for our firm. I interviewed a former colleague of mine who lives in American from Cleveland, who has lived in Kiev since the early 90s, and he is with the natural gas company. I've been following him, and he's now evacuated his family to Lviv, which is way on the western part of Ukraine. But that the gas is still flowing and things are still working as of this morning. But obviously, I think particularly as you pointed out, Omar, pig iron also, I've heard that some stainless is going to continue to, not that I think Ukraine is a huge exporter of stainless, but anything to do, as you know, with the global stainless market, it's so tight right now, any kind of disruption is just going to make things worse. So, and also a lot of the Russian exports are 4%, I believe, of steel are from Russia, and they send a lot of semi-finished, so we're keeping an eye on that as well.
Yeah, and then going back to the rare earths, niobium and vanadium are also two things that come from the Ukraine that are significant inputs, we've been told, into some of the metallurgical processes out there. So again, it's maybe not overnight, but it does something that we're watching closely on the ripple effects. But John, I know on Capitol Hill, they are watching supply chains closely, and officially on Tuesday, I think it was, John, the House officially did convey their supply chain bill, America Competes Act, over to the Senate, which means we're close to up and running on negotiations now.
So it is, when you're in school, you learn how a bill becomes law. And if House passes a bill, Senate passes a bill, it typically would go to a conference committee. Well, that's the way it used to be. But this year on supply chain, because both the House and the Senate and the administration all believe the supply chain is so important that they're going to have a rare conference committee to work out the differences. The Senate passed a very bipartisan China competition bill. The House passed a very partisan China competition bill. Only one Republican voted for it and one Democrat voted against it. Both bills provide $52 billion for the enhancement of the domestic semiconductor industry. They create regional manufacturing and technical hubs. So there's some really good things in the bill, but because the House Democrats and the progressives pushed the bill to make it partisan, they included a lot of progressive wish lists in this bill that probably is going to get knocked out because it won't pass the Senate. But it does include, for example, the PRO Act, which is the National Labor Union's wish list of a whole number of various labor proposals. We are optimistic because there is so much interest in the supply chain, and watching carefully what's going on, not just in Russia and the Ukraine, but also what's going on in China and the threats there. We are somewhat optimistic that we'll get this bill accomplished, potentially signed by the president by Memorial Day.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, commentary, I think it's going to be the most consequential bill for manufacturing since the America Competes Act of 2010. And that really did do a lot of good things for our industry, especially locally and regionalization and some manufacturing clusters. And this bill has a lot in there that in the end, when they do get this done, is going to have a bipartisan support from what we're hearing. There are some trade provisions that need to be ironed out, but there's also a good amount of effort on which we've been working closely with some of our allies when it comes to workforce. This bill we see as potentially a vehicle. We're hearing that it's unlikely we're going to get the Higher Education Act done later this year. The Workforce Innovation and Authorization Act needs to be redone. And part of that is the House is just getting started informally on it, but doesn't look like they'll be able to get that done by the summer, which means we really need to focus our efforts on support for many of these items dealing with STEM education. $5.2 billion in the House bill. The House does include the National Apprenticeship Act update, but we're hearing the Senate Education Committee wants to flesh that out a bit more, so that probably gets knocked out. But importantly, the House does add the Jobs Act, which does have strong bipartisan support in the Senate, that'll allow Pell Grants for industry recognized credentials and industry sponsored programs, and also decrease the amount of time for a number of hours that have to be used, 150 hours over 80 weeks, or 8 weeks rather, for eligibility for the Pell Grants, and also the College Transparency Act. So there's a number of measures that are included in there, and some good expansion. What the bills also do, because we received a question that was about the NEPs under NISC, there's a couple of things that are happening with regards to manufacturing extension partnership programs. The Hollings program over at NISC does get a boost and a broadening of responsibilities under this bill, under the competition bill, as we'll call it. So there's a pretty significant section there. The National Science Foundation also gets quite a bit of chunk of money, but at the same time, there's also an appropriations bill, the annual one, that also includes an increase in funding for MEP. So MEP's roles get expanded in the Competes USICA China bill, and then the funding gets increased in the appropriation. So it's sort of a 2 for 2 there. There's going to be a lot that comes out of it, John. I do believe that they'll get this done by Memorial Day. I don't know if they'll get it done in the next few weeks, but they are making progress from what we're hearing.
Yeah, I think what's happening in Europe is going to suck the air out of a lot of activity that's going to take place in Washington in the next few weeks. But again, I do believe this is a priority. And while you'd mentioned that the Senate Education Committee does, wants to further flesh out the Apprenticeship Act, I do believe as you talked about the appropriations process, we're going to see some additional dollars for apprenticeship programs in what we're going to call the omnibus, the appropriations bills moving forward. So good news out there that both parties, both chambers do recognize the importance of workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got about 8 minutes left, so let's just jump in and wrap it up here quickly on trade. We'll start on China issues and then jump into steel and aluminum tariffs, where we stand. There's a big report that came out last week rather, from the U.S. Trade Representative detailing, it's an annual report, every administration's put it out for a number of years, about Chinese compliance with the World Trade Organization that they entered in 2001. And obviously there's a number of areas where they still have yet to live up to their agreements. And that was a subject of a critical report on February 9th from the U.S. Trade Representative, and she continued that in a subsequent speech last Friday, saying that they want to continue to hold China accountable. As you can see here, where a number of areas affecting manufacturing, from medical devices to excess capacity, industrial subsidization, and state-owned enterprises, many things we've discussed over the years, and then restrictions on exports of certain items and imports of others, just to protect their industry. So the government did put out one of the more comprehensive report than over previous years on this. But John, a lot of that was prompted by China falling short of the agreement they struck with former President Trump in 2020 on purchases.
Yeah, and what this chart shows is that China only purchased 1/3 of what they promised from the United States. The areas of focus was going to be agriculture, manufacturing, and energy. And so overall, they fell 57. Only 57% of the goal was achieved, but on the manufacturing side, they did meet 59%. This next chart, it just shows broken down by industry where China is, where they're doing well and where they're falling short. And outside of semiconductor and COVID purchases, China fell short industry by industry.
Right, and I think this will help you understand, obviously, on semiconductors, that's no question that was going to go up obviously on healthcare, which is what those are, medical device related items. So there's no question, again, that those were going to increase. But in the core parts that most of our members manufacture, they did fall short. And let's be honest, no one ever expected them to fully live up to that agreement to begin with, but they are quite a bit off where they are. And where that leaves this administration is, what can you do? Xi Jinping is going to want to have anything that destabilizes the Chinese government between now and the fall vote for his, quote, re-election to a third term. And so between now and then, we're probably going to expect more stability, or rather it's more of the status quo, and the 25% tariffs and 7.5% tariffs on China are expected to continue. But on the steel front, that's a little bit different there. As we reported previously on our last webinar, we did tell you about the European Union tariff rate quota regime that is now up and running as of January 1st, quarterly regime for steel, which means through March 31st, and then a semi-annual regime for the aluminum for the EU. Since our last call, though, John, we did have another agreement with Japan.
Yeah, and it's not exactly the same. It does lift the tariffs and does institute a tariff rate quota similar to what they have with the EU, but it does not include aluminum at the request of Japan, from what we're hearing, and it doesn't talk about the studying of the overcapacity taking place in China. And so that was a step in the right direction. And now we do expect the administration to now shift to negotiations with the UK. That is likely the next country to resolve the steel and aluminum debate. It'll be with the UK. But one important thing, and Omar, you can explain this next slide, is how do we find out? The problem with the tariff rate quotas is it allows, the concern is that it could allow market manipulation from those big purchases. And so the agencies put out every Monday a report of where the steel purchases are by steel type.
Right, so a reminder, a tariff rate quota, it allows a certain amount of steel or aluminum from the specific European country, or now Japan, to enter into the United States within that quota period without paying the 25% or 10% tariffs. Once your product category reaches a certain level from that country, then the 25% for steel or 10% for aluminum take effect. You go every Monday afternoon, you click on this link on the far right, you go to the latest commodity status report, and it will bring you to the following charts. We just copied and pasted to show some that are relevant to some in this group. And you can see this is pulled from the most recent one that was on Monday, and it'll tell you what is remaining. So some of these items, so for example, if you're bringing hot rolled sheet from Slovakia, or if you're bringing in plate coming in from Finland, the tariffs are back in effect at 25% as of February 3rd and February 16th. For those two products. Same thing, if you're taking a look at plate cutting a length from Bulgaria, they're at 99.94. So you can expect that next Monday, you're going to see a timestamp that the 25% tariffs are back in effect there. So this is how you can tell what's left in the quota period. It might help some of your folks. You could probably share this with not just your steel buyers, but also some of your folks that are providing quotes in your shop on the sales side. So you can start saying, okay, we don't have a contract that's going to account for us to be able to buffer up that 25%. We might need to build that into our quote for the customer today in expectation of that. So just start thinking how you might want to familiarize yourself and use that. But Paul, it goes beyond just these tariff rate quotas, anti-dumping duties. There aren't enough. The steel industry is continuing to pursue other avenues as well.
Yeah, we're starting to see more letters going to Commerce from Congress. The one on the left was by Senator Brown and Senator Portman, and this is the electric steel, grain-oriented electrical steel goes. This was an issue that came up during the Trump administration, where they did another national security investigation, 232 investigation. The report was never released, and it was finally released under the Biden administration, where they had the Commerce had recommended a series of steps, including possibly tariffs. The Congress is saying that the Cleveland-Cliffs plant is, is under threat because it imports from Canada and Mexico. By the way, Cleveland-Cliffs and this for goes is running at about 100%, so I'm not sure how threatened they can be, but. So this other coalition, the Core Coalition, which I had some work with, is pushed back on them. Now, it's important to note as of now that this letter, I didn't include the whole letter, the Senate letter, it said that the U.S. should negotiate with Canada and Mexico. It's not calling for tariffs at this time, but this is about the third letter that I've seen on this issue, and so it's just a heads up for folks who are following this and who may use GOES steel. Thanks, Omar.
You want to stay with it, Paul?
Yeah. I think this is more of from same as the beginning. We thank you to all our media volunteers. We could always use more. Chris Rugeber down there and the Associated Press reporter writes the jobs report every month, and he's always looking to talk to manufacturers about what they're seeing on the ground, so he could put some something behind the numbers that he reports every month, or I think he's on it every other month. So we're always looking for volunteers, and I know both PMA and NTMA have sign-up forms. If you'd like to volunteer, we're happy to get on the phone with you to give you a little briefing and to provide all the information that you would need if you're interested in engaging with a reporter, because it could also be good advertisement for your plant. And please, we talk about these issues every other week on our podcast, Talking with One Voice, which is available wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, and a bunch of others. It's always a lively conversation.
Thank you all for joining us. You can always put a question in over on the right, and please do continue to support the advocacy programs that allows us to continue to do these monthly. Again, we're going to try to keep these to 30 minutes until we have some more additional breaking items, and we'll continue to go monthly through the summer. So please continue your support of the programs that are out there. Feel free to insert a question over to your right. Quick update on the heat index. There is a committee meeting starting here at 1 o'clock. The National Advisory Committee at OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health, is going to be talking about the heat index. So we've got a meeting from 1 to 3 o'clock today. So know that the heat index rule continues to move forward in addition to overtime and others. Please feel free to reach out to us, seeing if there's no additional questions. We are happy to go ahead and end the webinar. Feel free again, as always, reach out to us or PMA, NTMA, anything we can do to help. Happy to do so. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.